We have discussed Sellia before on the channel, however, as always, my perspective has changed on this location, and I feel like reconciling its story with Radahn's is a worthwhile endeavour for the context of this video, especially since there are some difficulties reconciling Sellia that we see now with the Sellia of Radahn's youth. This is a point raised by Lore Hunter in his video on Radahn, in which he posits the question why Radahn would protect a town that is so clearly associated with the Nox. In this chapter, I hope to explain the evolution of Sellia from a school of gravity magic to what it is now, a town of night magic with close ties to the Nox. With that being said, it always clearly has had close ties with the Numen people, and let's start with that connection. Marika herself is Numen, a fact established by the Numen rune, which reads the following: the Numen are said to have come from outside the lands between, and are in fact the same stock as Queen Marika herself. Sellia shares an architectural style with Ordina Liturgical Town, but as also highlighted by Tarnished Archaeologist in their Eternal Empire video, it also follows the same style as Lower Lane Dell. As we will explore in this chapter, Sellia has connection to the Numen people, and given that Lane Dell is the capital of Queen Marika, herself a Numen, it explains why they share an architectural style, and so we could see this type of style that we see in Ordina, Sellia and Lower Lane Dell as the Numen architectural style. But again, credit to Tarnished Archaeologist who made it apparent to me that Lower Lane Dell also shared this style with Sellia and Ordina, and I would highly recommend their Eternal Empire video. So we've established these three towns as having a tie to the Numen people, but Sellia also has a connection to another people, the Nox, and as we've discussed many times on this channel before, the Eternal Cities and the Nox are also related to the Numen people. The most well-known piece of evidence for this is found in the game's treatment of the Black Knife Assassins, who are named as Numen in their armour description, yet are also described as Scions of the Eternal City by Rogier.
You recall our conversation about the Night of the Black Knives, yes? They say the assassins who carried out the deed were Scions of the Eternal City, a group entirely of women arrayed in armour of silver under cloaks which fooled the eye.
And so with this connection in mind between the Eternal Cities and the Numen, it should come as no surprise that Gowrie also ties Sellia, a Numenesque town, to these Eternals.
As thanks, I vow to impart to you my knowledge of the lost sorceries of the Sellians, descendants of the Eternal.
Indeed, Sellia appears to maintain a strong connection to the Eternal Cities, even after their banishment, as Sellia hosts one of the crypt chairs of the Nox, as well as two members of their race, a swordstress and a Nox monk. Both of these members no doubt are here to safeguard the crypt chair. We don't know what these thrones are really for, yet the Site of Grace in Sellia names it as a crypt chair, and we also often find valuable items found underneath these crypt chairs, like Lusat's staff or the Black Moon talisman. The word crypt is defined by Oxford Languages as the following: an underground room or vault beneath a church, used as a chapel or burial place. So this confirms two things for us. The chair could have a pseudo-religious purpose, indicated by its upper half, and perhaps act as a sort of burial for these giant skeletons that we see in the Eternal Cities, but also that it functions as a vault for important items. As we have just discussed, there's often important items found underneath these crypt chairs. My speculation has always been that these thrones are ritualistic objects that is something to do with the Noxian goal of crowning a Lord of Night, as described in their armour sets, and that the giant bodies found atop these crypts are somehow failed attempts at creating an artificial Lord of Night, and that this is their burial, essentially. And if you want more details on that particular theory, I would recommend both my Albinauric lore video and my Eternal Cities lore video. Perhaps Lusat's staff being locked in Sellia's chair crypt could suggest that the Nox have a certain role in mind for Sellia's favourite son. Perhaps they could believe that he is the next Lord of Night, and they will try some certain experimentation or process on him. This is wild speculation, of course. However, it could just be that these giant skeletons and the chairs themselves are just symbolic guardians for important items to the Nox. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think these crypt chairs are for? Regardless of its purpose, its presence firmly cements Sellia's ties to the Eternal Cities, so much so that Sellia's own symbol features a crypt chair prominently, front and centre. Sellia is known as the Town of Sorcery, and the particular brand of sorcery that is taught here again cements its status as an Eternal City colony that retains close ties to the Nox. The very name of their branch of sorcery is called Night Sorcery, which is of course a reference to the Nox, which itself is Latin for night. This connection gets more explicit when we look at the spells themselves. Firstly, Night Maiden Mist, which is named after the Night Maidens of the Eternal Cities, and this is a spell they themselves use when we face them. Then there is the sorcery Eternal Darkness, which makes a reference to the Eternal Cities and seems to have originated there. It reads the following: originally a lost sorcery of the Eternal City, the despair that brought about its ruin made manifest. So Night Sorcery is clearly a school of magic that is an offshoot from Noxian practices, and as we can see from a lot of these spells, they quite often have a focus on misdirection and obfuscation, a manipulation and bending of light to make them hard to see or detect, given that we humans are beings who see in light. That is why they are called night sorceries. We see this in spells that make its users invisible, their weapons invisible, and offensive spells that are hard to see, and thus difficult to dodge. This makes sense if we consider that these spells are playing with light and manipulating it to make things invisible. And in practical application, these spells are employed for assassination purposes, such as in Unseen Blade, which reads, used by Sellian assassins to present themselves as unarmed sorcerers. So this is all well and good. Sellia is a town of sorcerous arts and sorcerer assassins. And as I argue in my Night of the Black Knives video, I believe they played a big role in the Night of the Black Knives in the development of the techniques and technology that would be used there. Yet this picture we have painted of Sellia of Noxian influence, assassins and night sorcery doesn't really mesh with the Sellia that General Radahn seems to have been educated in. Where is the Alabaster Lord? Where are the sorcerers that wield gravity magic just as Radahn does? My suggestion, therefore, is that while Sellia has always had ties to the Eternal Cities culturally, the Nox later exerted full control over it, and influenced it to create night sorceries. But in an earlier time, the Town of Sorcery was more closely associated with gravity magic, and this development of night sorceries is only a later development. It's an evolution of a town that was once known for gravity sorcery and is now known for night sorceries. As evidence of its gravity magic background, we have the evidence we've already reviewed, that being Radahn's remembrance that places him coming here to learn gravity magic. We also have the description of certain spells that tell us that Radahn's master was an Alabaster Lord. For example, Rock Sling, which reads the following: a gravitational technique studied by the young Radahn. His master was an Alabaster Lord with skin of stone. And if we put these two bits of evidence together from the Starscourge remembrance and Rocksling, Radahn came to Sellia to learn gravitational magic, and he was taught by an Alabaster Lord. That means that an Alabaster Lord must have been a teacher at the Town of Sorcery. These are beings well associated with gravity magic, and it must have been a well-known fact that Sellia was a school of renown for these types of magic. Radahn was an heir of the Carians, the most powerful sorcerer family when it comes to magic, with no doubt easy access to tutors and books, never mind the fact his mother was ruling Rea Lucaria at this stage as well. Yet despite this, Radahn specifically leaves Liurnia and seeks out Sellia, a remote town in Caelid, again reinforcing that Sellia must have been a well-renowned school for gravity magic, something he couldn't find in Rea Lucaria or Liurnia. This is reinforced when we consider Lusat, the aforementioned favoured son of Sellia. While Lusat in the current timeline is very associated with primeval sorcery, he's actually once associated with gravity magic in his past. We know that Lusat hails from this town thanks to a dialogue from Selin when we're trying to find him. She says,
"After his expulsion from the academy, I heard that Master Lusat returned to his home, a place called Sellia in the eastern Caelid wilds."
So again, I'll reiterate that while he is now known for primeval current sorcery, it seems that at one point he was renowned for bringing gravity magic to Rea Lucaria, something we learn of via the Elyvinus Glintstone Crown, which reads the following. The lineage of the Elyvinus Conspectus began with the sorcerer Lusat, and its adherents continue his study of meteors. So this suggests that Lusat, prior to being a primeval sorcerer, was actually an influential gravity magic practitioner, so much so that a conspectus or school was founded in his name, a school dedicated to gravity magic. Thus, the fact he is from Sellia further cements Sellia's history as the premier place to learn gravity magic, and this is why Radahn comes here instead of learning it at Rea Lucaria or at the hands of his mother's teachers. So again, I find it very interesting that in the current time, we see little evidence of this gravity magic history. Indeed, when Gary offers to teach us the sorceries of Sellia, he teaches us night sorcery, not gravity sorcery. Again, highlighting the fact that Sellia has long pivoted away from its gravity magic background. Lusat is a very old character in the game. Lusat's set includes the Old Sorcerer's leg wraps, which read, "Common amongst old-fashioned sorcerers." We also know that Lusat and Azur were founding Glintstone sorcerers, thanks to dialogues from Selin, who says,
"I need your help, my apprentice. Master Lusat is another founding Glintstone sorcerer, and like Master Azur, he was banished from the academy."
This all implies that Lusat's younger years were long ago, and given Radahn was also taught in Sellia by an Alabaster Lord in his younger years, my conclusion is that Sellia long ago was once a place for gravity magic, but then later fell under the sway of the Nox and became focused on night sorceries, perhaps in the lead up to the Night of the Black Knives itself, so that Ranni and her co-conspirators would have a base where they could develop the techniques necessary to become the Black Knife Assassins, with cloaks that fooled the eye. So that is a long tangent to be sure, but I feel it's important to understand Radahn's tie to this place, and how we can reconcile his education and protection of Sellia from the radically different Sellia that we now see. Initially, the Onyx Lord that you can face in the Carrion Everjail at Caria Manor was actually called an Alabaster Lord on their health bar, and I used to assume on my first playthrough that this was the Alabaster Lord that had once taught Radahn, and perhaps Ranni and or the Carrions in general had imprisoned this lord due to the indirect role that it played in arresting their fate. However, this does seem to have been a mistake, because the lord always had the curved sword of the Onyx Lord, even when it was named as an Alabaster Lord. And as we will discuss later in this video, the Alabaster Lord being imprisoned by the Carrions for this reason wouldn't make sense, as it appears that Ranni and her vassals haven't yet put two and two together by the time we come on the scene, as they don't realise that it is Radahn who's holding back Ranni's fate, as Iji expresses surprise when he finally realises that it is Radahn that is the cause of Ranni's destiny being halted, and therefore they wouldn't realise the role that the Alabaster Lord also had played. However, it does give an interesting illustration. I do believe that the Alabaster Lord was eventually driven out of the town of Sellia, which is why we can find no trace of it here. And so to conclude this chapter, I posit that Sellia was once a school of gravity magic in the past, overseen by an Alabaster Lord, but now Sellia is more under the control of the Nox, hence we see no trace of the Alabaster Lord or gravity magic now. And if you are wondering why Radahn would protect Sellia, a town that is associated with the Nox, and you don't understand why, perhaps this will help explain his reasons for doing so back in the day. And with all that said, in the next chapter we will explore his tutelage and why he earned the name the Starscourge. I've always liked to imagine Radahn's tutelage under this Alabaster Lord, and what Sellia would have been like at this time, before the destruction of Caelid, and before the Nox took it over to develop night sorceries. The Alabaster and Onyx Lords are very mysterious, and we know very little about them. They're very alien beings, literally. However, we do know that they are capable of interacting with humanity, and holding positions of prestige. As the meteorite description reads, the sorcery originates from the Onyx Lords, who had skin of stone, and were called lords in reverential fear of their destructive power. Thus we can assume that this Alabaster Lord held a position here for similar reasons. He was venerated and feared, and when Radahn came to Sellia, it took him under its arm. As a side note, if you want a deeper dive into the Alabaster and Onyx Lords, I do cover them quite extensively in my Cosmic Mysteries video. We get 3 examples of a type of gravity magic that Radahn mastered under the tutelage of this lord: Collapsing Stars, Gravity Well, and Rock Sling. We can see Radahn using these powers to great effect in our battle with him, and of course in his victory over the stars. Radahn's remembrance implies that his reasons for coming here was to continue the use of his horse. And as I suggested, I think the use of this is quite obvious. He manipulated gravity to release the weight and burden that he would place on his horse. Yet, during his time here, his motivation for using gravity magic does evolve, as the Collapsing Star spells reads the following: a gravitational technique mastered by the young Radahn. I thank you for your tutelage. Now I can challenge the stars. Now, given the quote found within this item description appears to take place following the completion of his studies, it implies that in some period between him arriving in Sellia and completing his studies, his objectives changed and he became aware of a threat towards Sellia. What would follow is the defining moment of Radahn's early years and his legacy, the Starscourge conflict. We hear of this conflict via the relevant sword monument, which reads, the Starscourge conflict, Radahn alone holds Sellia secure, and stands tall, to shatter the stars. So going by this sword monument, Radahn's purpose in challenging the stars is pretty evident. He is seeking to protect Sellia from some kind of star-bound threat. How he became aware of this threat is up to interpretation. Of course, as I discussed earlier, being a prince of Carian heritage, he will have been taught about fate and the movement of these stars via his Carian preceptors. However, Loki offers another interesting perspective. Loki pointed out to me that in the Redmane Castle itself, there are one of these celestial stone basins. I have always just referred to these as stone basins, but shout out to Loki for teaching me their real name, that being a hemicelium. In the real world, these devices are essentially sundials, but in the world of Elden Ring, we can see that they are clearly more associated with the stars because of their particular locations and the fact that they often have starlight shards next to them. But these are astrological tools, and they are found in areas that are associated with the Carians or astrologers, such as the mountain tops of the giants, or in Caria Manor itself, and here of course in Redmane Castle, the base of a Carian prince. So perhaps using this device and reading the movements of the stars or reading fate, he was able to anticipate this attack. And again, credit to Loki for making me aware of this possibility. But the extent of the power that he demonstrated during this conflict cannot be overstated, and we get a flavour of how overwhelming his victory is via the Starscourge heirloom, which reads, the mightiest hero of the demigods confronted the falling stars alone, and thus did he crush them, his conquest sealing the fate of the very stars. So I think this heirloom lays out quite neatly what happened here. It was a physical threat of falling stars that threatened Sellia, but in defeating them and holding them in stasis to stop them falling, he then sealed the fate of the stars. The effect of this is well explained by Selin, who says,
the stars alter the fate of the Carian royal family, and the fate of your mistress, Rani. But long ago, General Radahn challenged the swirling constellations, and in a crushing victory arrested their cycles. Now he is the force that repulses the stars. If General Radahn were to die, the stars would resume their movement, and so too would Rani's destiny.
So as we hear from Selin, Radahn is literally using the power of gravity to hold the stars in stasis. Can you consider the power a being must have to literally arrest the movement of actual celestial bodies? That the gravity power he impresses upon these falling stars actually overwhelms their natural gravity and movements of the cosmos? It is a titanic feat, and it really makes Radahn worthy of the term God. This is the type of feat that you'd hear in an ancient Greek myth. Not only this, but Radahn continues to hold them in place. He keeps this power manifested right up until the current era. He held them in place while fighting Malenia, the other most powerful of the demigods. And he held them in place even when he was being rotted away by the Scarlet Rot. Even with his brain being rotted away, some will within him kept him holding the stars back in place. And now, while I'm always team Malenia, she is my favourite demigod of course, I would be delusional to disregard the implications of this. Had Radahn not been using a portion of his power to literally hold the stars back, a significant feat, would Malenia have even stood a chance? Or would he pinned her to the earth with gravity, or ripped her apart with his magics? I think so, and Radahn makes a great point about this. In his Heroic Concepts series, Radahn makes the point that each of the heroic concepts of the gods has been taken and twisted to the extreme, and in each case, it leads to their downfall. As we've already discussed, Radahn's twisted heroic concept is his unwillingness to let go of the past, his veneration of past heroes, his nostalgia, his conservatism, however you want to put it. Had Radahn just had the flexibility in his ideals to let go of the stars, he would have been able to face Malenia with all of his might, and she wouldn't have had a chance to unleash her Scarlet Rod. And thus it was his inflexibility in his ideals that led to his death, because he forced himself to hold back, and thus she unleashed the Scarlet Rot. Again, this is a great series by Radahn, especially the video on Radahn, and I highly recommend you check out these videos on the idea of heroic concepts. In my mind, I've always viewed Radahn more as a force of stagnation, and as people familiar with the channel will know, stagnation is an important theme that is explored in Dark Souls and in Elden Ring. In Shinto, there is a concept that life should flow like flowing water. When water is fast flowing, it is pure and clean. In opposition to this, a stagnant pool of water is full of parasites and impurities, and this idea of pollution is a concept also known as kegare. And as such, this is why stagnant water thematically is often associated with pollution and death. So these Shinto ideas of going with the flow, accepting things as they are as life moves, is actually also a theme that permeates Star Wars in its accounting of the Force. George Lucas explained the nature of Jedi and Sith in the Star Wars archive. That when you're a Jedi, you are meant to go with the flow of life, let things move on and pass through you, whether that be your loved ones dying or relationships changing, you just go with it. The Sith, alternatively, are people that try to hold on to power, to their loved ones, and thus instead of moving with the Force and flowing with it, they try and hold it and dominate it and control it to meet their own aims, rather than just going with the aims and flow of the Force. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Radahn and the Sith. No, Radahn and the Starscourge conflict. Apologies. Jokes aside, the Jedi and Sith are a good way of understanding this concept of flow and stagnation. And Radahn, like the Sith, rather than going with the flow of fate, tries to hold on to everything and force fate to bend to his will. He won't let go of his horse, despite his body moving past it, and he will not let go of Sellia, the place that he has come to hold dear in his heart, a place where he grew up. And indeed, we get illustrations of stagnation within the world of Elden Ring in other places, such as those who live in death. As I said, Stagnant water is quite often linked to death in this thematic analogy, mainly because stagnant water in real life breeds impurities and parasites, and that is why stagnant water is associated with those who live in death in Elden Ring. No group of people exemplifies the idea of stagnation more than those who live in death, beings who are eternally stuck in a state of death. Their life has completely stopped flowing, and is more akin to a stagnant pool of water. Hence why we often find those who live in death in stagnant pools of water, why there are tibia mariners, mariners who are in boats, and why Godwyn has taken on an aquatic form in Undeath. I would recommend Aesir Aesthetics' video on Silent Hill if you'd like a more educated and in-depth take on the subject of Kagari and stagnation. But I believe this long tangent will help me explain and why I believe that Radahn himself is also a force of stagnation in Elden Ring, because it has stopped the flow of the abyss, an analogous river in itself. He has halted the flow of fate, resulting in a sort of stagnation. The world we enter is stagnant. With a shattered Elden Ring, there is no progression. The lands between are stuck in this in-between era. Had fate been flowing, had the stars not been halted and stagnant, then Ranni could have completed the Age of Stars already. The only reason she needs our help in the current era is because of Radahn's actions, and thus Radahn's veneration of the past and unwillingness to let it go has contributed to the stagnant world that we find ourselves in. And with that thematic analysis of what Radahn stands for done, let us return to the Starscourge conflict itself. In the past I had asked the question of why Sellia was in danger. Did Radahn freeze fate because fate itself was turning against Sellia? Well, I think the Starscourge heirloom that we looked at earlier makes it clear that Sellia was under physical threat from falling stars. And the very fact that a falling star does impact on the earth after we defeat Radahn really does hammer home that Sellia was under physical threat. However, an alternate view to it just being a falling star that would have damaged Sellia is that it was essentially a cosmic invasion by beings like Estelle and the falling star beast. In Zuli's video on Estelle, they identify an old unused animation for Estelle, which was very similar to Radahn's animation, where he crashes down into the earth like a meteorite. And it is fascinating that Estelle, a being itself that is a malformed star, has this animation, literally making it a falling star. Zuli concludes that the most likely arena for this original animation would have been the Wailing Dunes, not only for the crossover in VFX between Radahn and Estelle, but also the sheer size needed for this animation. It would have covered a large area, and thus the Wailing Dunes are a logical candidate for where this fight could have taken place with this old animation. A location that is very close to Sellia, of course. And so I leave it up to you to decide whether you believe it was a falling star or a literal cosmic invader that threatened Sellia. Either way, the intent of his actions are clear. It was to physically stop the stars from harming Sellia, as is stated by the Starscourge heirloom. It was not to fetter fate. This just seems to be a consequence of his actions. However, what is debatable is whether he decided to keep the stars frozen and keep fate fettered because of his beliefs after, following the initial Starscourge conflict. And I do change my mind on this quite often, but I do think items like the telescope maybe imply that he is aligned with the Golden Order, as it reads the following. During the age of the Erdtree, carrying astrology withered on the vine, the fate once writ in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. I have found the item description always very interesting, because it states that the Golden Order fettered the stars, but we know from Selin's dialogue that it was Radahn who fettered fate, and thus is this telescope description equating Radahn as the Golden Order? This would tie in with what we see on his armor description, that he is someone who venerates the past, and these past heroes are people aligned with the Golden Order, Godfrey and Radagon, and so this would all tie together. But as we have shown, his initial reason for doing so was to protect Sellia, and so my conclusion, and it is a tentative one, is that he did stop the stars to protect Sellia, but later, because of his ideals, he kept them frozen to keep fate fettered so that he might continue the previous order, a la Godfrey and Radagon. I don't think it's necessarily a direct attack on his sister or the Carians, and is more about emulating those past heroes and those past orders. And indeed, Ranni's vassals don't even seem to be aware that this is the reason that they cannot move forward with their plans. They do not know that it is Radahn who is responsible, as E.G. expresses surprise when he puts 2 and 2 together and realises that it is in fact Radahn who is holding back fate.
Oh no. Wait, how did I not see it before? I ought to retire as war councillor for such a gross oversight. Let me explain. The fate of the Carian royal family is guided by the stars, as is the fate of Lady Rani, first heir in the Carian royal line. But General Radahn is the conqueror of the stars, who stood up to the swirling constellations, halting their movement in a smashing victory. And so, if General Radahn were defeated, the stars would once again resume their movement, as would Lady Rani's destiny, perhaps even revealing the elusive path.
General Radahn's history with Sellia is one of the most important formative elements of his character. It is here he would become the master of gravity magic, and it is here he would win his greatest victory, over the stars themselves. It is little wonder, therefore, that Miquella saw in Radahn a man most worthy of the title of Lord. Thank you so much for watching this short Elden Ring lore video. This lore video is a segment from a much larger and longer video on my main channel, and a link to the full video can be found in the description. If you are interested in more Elden Ring lore content, then be sure to subscribe here and on my main channel Smowtown. But until next time, I will see you in the lands between.